Good morning and welcome to Talk Clarity. I'm your host, Coach Clarity. We'll continue on with segment 4 with Haley the therapist from Trauma Agility.
Dr. Sean Horn, she's a psychologist and just amazing on shame. And she's like, Brene Brown and her are like the best at shame. But she said, like, I find that shame is a really confusing topic for people. They don't know what it is or what it looks like. And we talk about toxic shame with other words like people pleasing, perfectionism, low self esteem, social phobia, performance anxiety, inner critic, self sabotage, eating disorders, addiction. But all of those are shame. All of those are learned behaviors. And so when we're talking about the 4Fs, all of those have to deal with shame, which is something that we develop from pain. So you get rid of the shame, then you get rid of the pain.
Wow. Really just plugging yourself into resources that's going to allow you those opportunities. I think most people don't know who to seek out. There's a stigmatism, I'm sorry to say, that comes with therapists where they can do more damage than good. On that note,
therapists that are like that.
So where do people go to find a good therapist? How do you identify somebody that's going to be able to help you work through something as minimal as shame?
Psychologytoday.com is a really good resource that I use. I'm not affiliated with them, but I love it because you can see the therapist profiles and you can see their pictures. Some of them even have videos up on there, like talking. So you kind of get a feel for, what it would be like to talk with them. And you can filter it by your insurance. You can filter it by the issues that you might be having, like relational trauma, like all different kinds. They've got several on there. And then you can filter it by your zip code. And you can even filter it now. I love this, that a lot of them offer virtual appointments now too. So you don't even have to leave your home to do this.
So those struggling with extreme trauma and that don't want to leave their home, don't want to go anywhere, they're able to tap into this from their own home.
Yeah.
Using their own insurance.
Yeah.
Well, you look at, just as of recent, we just went through a pandemic. People weren't sure if they were going to live. People weren't sure who was going to survive. And we're talking about children and adults. So the entire world has gone through trauma.
Yes.
It's now become higher than 3 out of 4 this last year or so. Yeah. So I think having those resources, and I'll attach the information that you provided on that. Are there any other resources that people could tap into?
What I would say, kind of, you could always reach out to your insurance company. They've got a panel of providers, but that doesn't really give you like a whole lot of, insight into who these people are and what they do. So I would look at their website. So I would look at your insurance and then look at the provider and then look at their website and then see what they do, see what types of modalities that they work through. And I would even call them and be like, hey, I've got this issue. Like, what can you do for me? And it's up to them to really describe to you what they do and how they can help you. Right. And if they can't help you, a good therapist would refer you to, and we got a huge network of therapists. They would refer you to a therapist that could help you. But I think that's an issue that I think as a field, we need to really grow is like, how do we put ourselves out there? How do we get trauma informed for one, right? There's not a whole lot of trauma informed therapists out there. And I feel like there's a huge push for that now in the field. So, if you're a therapist listening to this, like get with the American Counseling the ACA, the American Counseling Association, get with your APA, like figure out like how you can, like, there's a whole bunch of trainings out there that are super cheap that you can really just hack into what trauma is. And you almost, and it's almost interesting too. Like this field is going towards science so much that it's almost like you have to have a medical degree to understand this stuff too. So that's where like your interdisciplinary teams, I can't say that word. Interdisciplinary
You can
teams.
re-say that part if you want.
Yeah. This is where your interdisciplinary teams really come into play, right? Your doctors, your psychiatrists, your massage therapists, like get some like sensory deprivation tanks going on, like somatic healing. Like this is just, we need it all.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you sharing some of the resources that, the community is going to be able to tap into. I know I've spoken with people that are going, I don't know how to find a good therapist. I don't even know where to begin or where to go. And are they going to label me as crazy and put me in a psych ward? And it's so sad that, that human beings, because where I work, there'll be people, on my team, my day job, and they're scared to go seek out help because they're scared of the repercussions and what's going to happen. Are they going to be shamed? Are they going to put them somewhere? And I've had some interesting conversations with some of these individuals, and it hurts my heart that we don't have the information out there for individuals to tap into when we're talking 3 out of 4, 75% of people, and even higher this last year with the recent pandemic, and that was, that 3 out of 4 number, that 75% number is just by parents and caregivers by ages of 2 to 4. So, when you take a children that are abused by a parent or a caregiver, 75% of them, according to the statistics, you have to hope that you've got, one parent with a good head on their shoulders that's going to identify the problem and pull them out and get them the help they need, or at least get them out of the situation. You're gonna hope that that's the case, but we're talking about 75%. What does the relationship look like with the adolescent as they get older? They have questions. They want to explore things. They want to know who they are. There's this longing for things. And so what does that picture look like? And I'm trying to get into an area that I just don't know if I know how to even ask the right questions, because you have children, 75%, that are abused by a parent or caregiver, according to the CDC. And you take those numbers and those statistics, and as time evolves, and you get this child some help, you try to heal, you try to help them grow, adolescence hits, change starts to hit within their brain. You'll start to see some things as a parent that you don't know how to navigate. And I think really what I want to get into is, how does a parent or a caregiver that's involved with a child that has been through trauma, how do they help them navigate things through adolescence, and what types of behaviors and things are they going to see, and what are the effects in the community?
Oh, I think you touched on a really important point. Okay, so and this is where we as a community really have to come together, and we really have to raise awareness, just like we're doing on this podcast, like with this stuff, is we need eyes on deck at school counselors, right? We need eyes on deck, like know who your kids are hanging out with. Don't just allow them to go over to some, parent's house and you don't know them. Like, get to know who your kids know, right? And I think that healthy community members who aren't abusing our kids, and there's a bunch of us out there, right? We're not abusing our kids, but we can help, like, keep eyes out. So if you see something, say something, right? And I think that's really important, especially because kids have, and Dr. Phil says this all the time, is that kids have this innate ability to just take on everything as their fault. They're broken, they're wrong, they're unlovable. And that's so far from the truth. right? And it's based on their caregiver's ability to connect and to have that relationship and their own trauma. And so we can't heal the entire world, right? But I think it starts with us. What are we doing in order to keep ourselves healthy? What are we doing in order to keep our communities healthy? And what are we doing, like, if we see a kid who needs help? Are we ignoring him, or are we asking questions? Are we trying to, to get them help?
And what ways can, individuals and human beings, when they identify this, in what ways can they get them help?
So 911 is always a resource, right? If you feel like the child is in imminent danger, you can always call 911. You can call your local police station in the non-emergency number and say, like, hey, I have a suspicion. You can talk to a therapist about it. We're mandated reporters. And so if we, suspect something's going on, then we're going to investigate it further. You can talk to the parents and get a feel for what's going on at their home. If you suspect something going on, like, try and get involved that way. But the problem is there's a lot of people out there that just don't want you in their business. Right. And
Right.
so I think creating and here's how I do it, right? So we communicate as humans mostly non-verbally. So it's not what we say, it's how we say it and how we speak it through our body. So if you have a nonverbal presence, a vibe, people say, or like a spirit about you, an aura, that says, I'm warm, I'm inviting, you can come talk to me. Like, I know you have a very specific vibe like that, where it's just like, come talk to me about anything, right? And you create that warm, supportive environment, people will come to you naturally.
Okay.
So
I appreciate that. Taking a look.
There's no easy answer. Sorry for that.
What?
There's not an easy answer for that. I wish that there was. I wish that we could just like wave a magic wand and it'd all be gone. But I mean, we're facing some real issues here. So.
Well, and it's everywhere now.
Mm-hmm.
It's it breaks my heart as a parent. The reality that our kids are living in.
Yeah.
I want to dive into adolescence now because hot topic, right? Wow, teenagers, adolescents, junior high, high school kids.
8-year-olds are having sex in their schools. 14-year-olds are selling meth. And this is just in Utah. Like, and it's a problem. It's a problem.
Well, with adolescents, you're talking, almost every child that, has been through some form of abuse. So you're going to see, as you, talked previously about, the brain changing. So let's talk about those neural pathways that you were talking about, the brain changing, and, hormones, friends, peer pressure. What are we going to start seeing in these junior high, high school kids? What are we going to start seeing, those that have been through trauma? And again, we're talking about 75% or more. What are we going to start seeing behaviors? When are we going to get into? What are some things that we can identify? Because I think oftentimes, you have that parent that goes, "Oh, my kid's perfect." Well, they are, and they were just so perfect, and they're a good kid. But there's outside influences that affect them. There's trauma that may be unresolved that's affecting these kids. And you've got a good kid, and society is just putting so much pressure and weight, and I believe social media as well. So, but I really want to dive into adolescence and how to navigate that as a parent, as a school resource officer, as a guardian ad litem in a courtroom that's going, I want to emancipate my parents. I don't like what my parents doing. I want to date this guy, or I want to hang out with my friends and stay out later. I should have no rules. I should have no boundaries, because those are the, a lot of the behaviors that you'll see in teenagers. So let's dive into that a little bit more, and I'm going to let you lead the floor with that.
couple things come to my mind. Lack of discipline, for one. And effective discipline, right? And I'm not talking wall-to-wall counseling. I'm not talking switches, but I'm don't ignore your kids, right? And that's what they're seeking. Like, I have a family member, and I won't dive into too much detail on this, but I have a family member who is really struggling with their teenage kid right now. And he, here's my belief. I'll just start with this, right? Like, here's my belief. All kids are inherently good. All people are inherently good. We were not born evil. We're not born broken. We're not born like with these narcissistic tendencies and these reactive, emotional reactivity. Love that word, emotional reactivity. We weren't born with this already like programmed into us. So it was learned somewhere, right? So if we look at the red flags of things, of like if they are normally outgoing and they start to be isolating, if they start to say one-word answers and they're normally really talkative, and you'll see these subtle behavior changes. It doesn't happen overnight. And you'll see it like right after the trauma happens. So something happens at school, they'll like hang their head down low or whatever. And unless you open up that conversation with them of that communication, they're not going to tell you unless they like really trust you because of that shame, right? Of that guilt of like, why can't I figure this out? And with hormones on top of that, like they already don't know what they feel. And it feels like chaos within them. Like if you look back and think back to when you were a teenager and what you felt in those mood swings, oh my goodness, like it was like a tornado inside of you, right? And
so hard to navigate and juggle and so confusing. And
girls are mean. Girls are mean.
Girls are mean.
Yeah, and in middle school, oh my goodness, like you're having so many changes. You're having so many questions. And I think in Utah in particular, like growing up there and seeing like, and being on the other side of it now as an adult, like we don't really talk about a whole lot of things regarding around sex, right? Any sexual changes, any type of like puberty changes. I remember the first time I learned about it was in a maturation program, and I was like horrified because they were showing me pictures. And I had like no buffer whatsoever. It's like, this is an STD. This is what it looks like. And I remember like being sick, physically sick, and I had to leave health class because of it. And so like, I'm not the only one that feels this way. I get clients in all the time that are just like, even young adults there. It's like, man, my parents never had these conversations with me. Like I started my period, I started bleeding all over my chair, and like, I thought I was bleeding out and dying, And so I think the more that we talk about being human and these mood fluctuations and these hormonal changes with our kids, I think the less, knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. And you use power in order to grow. And it's a positive energy, and it's a chance for you to bond with your kids too, and have these conversations and build that trust and build that safety with them to talk about these things. And so when you're dealing with these fluctuations and these like teenage angst years, I mean, it's hard. It's hard. I've got one too. Like it is so difficult when you're trying to get the kids out and trying to get them like to have fun at a pool, and your teenager's just sitting there and it's like, I am so tired. Like, no, I don't want to go. The pool's too cold, or it's too early, or it's too like, but what's he really trying to say at that point, right? I'm feeling something in my body. And, by pushing that agenda of like, well, you're just going to stay here and you're just going to, suffer the consequences or whatever, like the way that, some parents talk to their kids these days, it's just rough. Like, I think the times that I laugh the most is when parents come in to sessions with their kids and then they're like, I'm only here so you can fix them. And I look at them and I'm like, oh, really? Let's start with you. because that's where the majority of the issues lie. And I think too that there are, I mean, it's not one size fits all, approach to this. I think that there are parents out there that are phenomenal parents, and you can do everything right, and you can do everything in your power to just, help your child grow and mature, but then something still happens, and that's up to the child. They're their own person, they're their own independent, and they have social influences, they have other parental influences, they have societal influences. You look at these celebrities and they're stick figures, and so these females that are growing up, they're like, oh, I have bad body image issues because this is what I'm supposed to look like. And that's all of that I just described. Shame. It surrounds shame. And so the antidote for shame is disclosure. So the more that we talk about it, the less shame holds power, and the more that you can just feel safe. Because if you feel shame, you don't feel safe to do anything. And if you don't feel safe, you don't grow.
So true. You're looking at, these, a lot of these kids nowadays they're getting involved into gangs, they're hurting other people. These are kids.
Mm-hmm.
These are hurt kids, in my opinion, hurting other people, robbing things, stealing things, no respect for anyone around them. And, it's interesting because I've seen, you know, children come from good homes, good backgrounds, and it's been really sad to see some of the things that we're seeing now in today's society. And after taking a look at some of the statistics and just researching a little bit, it makes more sense, as to why the numbers are so high with crimes, why the numbers are so high with, children with STDs, and I kind of wanted to dive in a little bit more and talk about some of these issues, some of the behaviors that are involved, because we're talking about some really aggressive behaviors, but the statistics with them are so high now that it blows my mind away.
Yeah.
49% with some sort of mental health disorder that they're finding in statistics. What I think oftentimes two parents can be so blindsided, because you take a child, they come from a good home, and yet they have either two loving parents or one loving parent. Nowadays it's mostly single parents in society, and so you have a loving involved parent that's involved, and the kid comes home from school, things seem normal, they're spending time with you, you're laughing, you're functioning as a family, and there's this picture perfect look of, where everybody, looks at this family like, man, they just got it together. They're just the perfect family. But if you take some of the back picture here, and you take, a child, who maybe was abused, and maybe that other parent's not involved in the, single parent, we're talking 3 out of 4 kids. So we're talking about a pretty high percentage here. You take a look at some of the things that you start to identify, and some things that start to change that you don't realize, or maybe, are leading into more, leading into things like where maybe these kids they come from good homes, go and attach to these gangs. I had a friend that I worked with, that had told me that came from a good home, high society family, money, had access to whatever he wanted, but yet joined this gang and was just with this rough crowd and doing these things that apparently you wouldn't, think that would happen, and developing these behaviors. And, I'm talking about, and let's take a look even with teenagers in school, and, these older guys coming after our younger kids. It's another area and hot topic that we haven't gotten into, that I was hoping to get into today, because human trafficking is on the rise, especially with children. And I think it's important to talk about what this looks like, because from the statistics and things that I polled, children aren't necessarily being grabbed out of a back alley somewhere. It's happening within it's happening within homes.
Yeah.
And it's happening with, these adult predators, getting involved with our youth, getting involved, seeking them out. And it really is on the rise. These predators are really on the rise. In fact, actually, I have a question for you. How likely, or what are the statistics involved for somebody that has been abused to likely end up as a perpetrator later on in life, in their adult years, early adult years? It's really a hot topic to get into because we're talking about 3 out of 4 and then they grow up.
Too many. Because it's just transfer of pain. So if we simplify it down, right? Gangs, abductions, grooming. For the kids, what are they looking for?
Love, attention, acceptance.
Mm-hmm. All of the above. So if they are starved of that, where are they going to find it?
They'll seek it out.
That's why they are so vulnerable for these types of things. And that's why people who are perpetrators, it's like they have a target. They've got a sense, they've got a spidey sense, right? And they are the ones that seek out these types of relationships because you can spot a codependent a mile away just based on the act. And remember when I said a lot of our communication isn't nonverbal? These perpetrators can go into a schoolyard, scan, and within seconds pick out the vulnerable ones. Why? Because they know what pain looks like. They're in pain. And they want to hurt others.
Wow.
I used to work in a prison. I used to work in a rehabilitation program down in Florida. And a lot of, I would say the vast majority of them came from broken homes, and sought out gangs and peers and got into some trouble, not because they actually wanted to, but because that's what the malignant people around them were telling them to do. And if they were to be part of a community, they sure as hell didn't have one at home, right? They were going to do whatever it took to keep their family. And that was their family. And so you'd get these incredibly talented individuals. And in this particular prison, it was all males. So for the males that I worked with, they were just talented. They were manipulative, but they had some good qualities about them. And that's where I developed a belief of people are inherently good. They're not all evil. They're just needing something. They're wanting something. They're craving something. They're screaming for something. What is that?
Which is why we're seeing the extreme behaviors we're seeing nowadays. Mm-hmm. They're seeking it that much that it's winding them up in a place like juvie and prison.
Yes.
Wow, that's heartbreaking. Mm-hmm. Let's dive in and talk about personality disorders because, with the neural pathways changing and the things that you mentioned there, you've kind of briefly touched on different disorders, but let's actually go into, some of the different mental disorders and what they are and what those are going to look like and how we're going to identify this. I think this is so critical with the numbers so high that school resource officers, school therapists, parents, friends, guardian ad litems, the court system. I'm talking about everybody. Everybody's so divided. So, just some education here on the different disorders when we're talking 75%, what we're likely to see, and what are those symptoms of those disorders.
So let's go to links first, right? What causes these disorders? So like verbal abuse from parents have been linked to personality disorders like narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and then, paranoid types. And you have borderline personality disorder too, has a huge high connection to sexual trauma, and so does narcissism. And like, I mean, I could talk for days on this, like sensitivity to like loud sounds can lead to social phobias in children. So like if you throw around things, if you're a parent, like you might have like social anxiety and stuff like that. Like, and then genetics can play a factor in that too, right? But I have a theory that like, especially for narcissism, and I could talk about narcissism all day. But I think that there are, you've got the covert and the overt, but it's all based on, insecurities. And I do feel like there are, genetic narcissists, and then there are trauma narcissists. And speaking specifically to the trauma narcissists that develop narcissistic personality disorder because of the trauma that they have been through, because of the extreme invalidation in their environments. There's a way to break this down into simple terms, because the DSM-5, our diagnostic criteria, is just like, so like you have to meet like, at least 5 of the following features, or you have to meet like these. There's so many different symptoms, but let me just break it down into like very simple terms. So antisocial personality disorder, they have like a complete disregard for others. They don't care. They want to hurt people. They're so hurt. They're so numb. Like, it's like, if you ever meet an antisocial personality disorder, a true antisocial, you look into their eyes and it's like they have no soul. Just look at the Ted Bundy interviews, right? And it's like they talk about like death, like nothing. There's like no personality. And, going back to brain scans and stuff, prefrontal cortex, like there's like no activity there. So narcissism, like you have your coverts, which are like kind of behind the scenes and hidden. That's based on extreme insecurity. And then you have your overt, and that is more of your like malignant narcissist, your grandiose narcissist, the narcissist that you typically see on like TV, like in Harry Potter, like Professor Lockhart or whatever his name is, and he's just like, oh, like definite narcissist. Which is funny, like side tangent, I've got ADHD too. So, but side tangent, you look at Disney, like they all come from dysfunctional families. And you look at the fantasy, like stories that we love to connect to, they all have dysfunctional families too, which is why we connect to it so well. But I digress. And then you have histrionic, and history, like hyster comes from like your womb, right? And a lot of the hysteria, that they talk about with the females, like in the early 1920s, like that's a thing. Histrionic is more of a outburst, like extreme, like excessive need for approval. And so I always think of like Mariana and the Diamonds, her song, what's it called? Prima Donna, like Prima Donna Girl. And she's like, and all I ever wanted was the world. And like, I'm going to swoon over everything, and I'm just going to make it super dramatic. And I'm just going to like, because they're just trying to get a need heard. Like they just want to be heard. And then, borderline personality disorder, so is like an extreme emotional reactivity. You have self-harming behaviors, self-sabotaging behaviors. And in the most severe cases, like I think that there's levels, there's anxiety and depression. I think that there's, PTSD. I think borderline personality disorder is up here. And then like narcissism is right here. And then DID, a dissociative identity disorder, or multiple personality disorder, that's like up at the top. So there's like different varying levels. And I always say like it's based on intensity. So the intensity of the trauma is the intensity of your reaction. So if you have like these extreme reactions, you had an extreme trauma happen to you. Or, you know, there's a lot of studies about genetics too. So, but I think genetics, like you can rewire your DNA and then pass your DNA down to your kids. So I think like genetically, and I'm, you know, there's a whole field of epigenetics, but genetically, I think that their trauma can be passed down.
Wow. I'm just observing all that.
That's a lot.
That was a lot of information to digest, I think, for me and for our listeners. So thank you on that. You know, getting into, you know, these personality disorders, what age range are we likely going to see these personality disorders develop after trauma? What should we be looking for?
Oh my goodness. That is such a hard question to answer. I have met a 9-year-old antisocial. Like murdering cats, completely, like you see these children who have been extremely neglected or extremely abused. And I mean, you can go on the internet and find like all age ranges. And so I can't answer that accurately because it all depends on the person and how they absorb the trauma and what they do about it. And like I said, if you absorb it and you hold it there, it's going to get worse over time. And so there are some cases too where, especially in PTSD, where you would go through very specific traumas and not feel the effects until years afterwards because you are so numb to what happened that your body just takes forever to process it. And so it really just depends on what you do. And that's why I say, like, if you have a trauma, like go to therapy immediately, find some safe outlet